Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the moonlit back streets of Istanbul, back when it was still called Constantinople, in polite European letters, but whispered as the heart of the empire in every narrow alley of the Ottoman world. You're not strolling beneath golden domes or browsing in crowded bazaars. No, you're heading somewhere quieter, stranger, somewhere that wakes up when the rest of the city dims down. This is the world of Ottoman coffee houses. Not the tourist kind, not the midday scene with old men and pigeons. We're talking about the nightlife, where the lamps burn low, the smoke curls thick, and the conversations could either change nothing or topple an empire. You probably won't survive this if you walk in like you own the place, but you'll definitely learn how to blend in. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love knowing which corner of the world we're sharing stories with tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin near the Golden Horn, where the water breathes softly against stone embankments, and the ferrymen are finishing their final crossings. You can smell smoke, yes, but not from wood or meat. This smoke is delicate. It tastes like clove and cardamom in the air. You follow it through a narrow alley where stray cats stretch like silk between sleeping crates. No signs, no open windows, but you know you're getting closer because your steps begin to slow. The cobblestones feel warmer. The light from above lanterns hanging from crooked iron arms begins to soften into a kind of golden soup. And then you see it. Or at least you think you do. A door that's slightly too narrow. A flicker of movement behind a half-drawn curtain, the sound of something being stirred, not hurriedly, but with the slow patience of someone who knows the night will last long enough for everything to unfold. You knock, once, then wait. The door doesn't open immediately. You hear muffled voices, laughter, and what might be a lute strumming somewhere behind a wall. Then a latch clicks, and the heavy door creaks open just far enough to admit you. No words, just a nod. You enter. The warmth hits you first, not just temperature mood. A thick blend of roasted coffee, sweet tobacco, and old cedar. The room is dim lit only by low-hanging lamps filled with oil and soot-flecked glass. You hear nothing sharp, no clanging cups, no shouts, only the murmur of voices, the occasional cough, and the gentle clink of a spoon in a porcelain cup. You've stepped into something slow, something simmering. Here's your first mainstream historical fact. Ottoman coffee houses, or kahvehaneler, began sprouting in the 16th century and quickly became centers of urban life, especially in Istanbul. More than cafes, they were neutral territory where class, religion, and title faded in the haze of coffee steam and conversation. You make your way to a low cushion near the wall, careful not to block anyone's view of the center of the room. No one looks at you directly, but you're being seen, weighed. Not for threat, but for flavor. Your host pours you a cup of something black as ink and twice as thick. The ground settles slowly like silt in a jar. There's no sugar, no milk. This is not dessert. It's truth serum served hot. Now here's your first quirky tidbit. Early Ottoman coffee houses often doubled as performance spaces and unofficial newsrooms, but many also had reputations as mystical spaces, places where after enough cups, you might speak to Jinn, glimpse the future, or at the very least, hear a stranger confess a dream that doesn't quite feel like his own. Historians still argue whether these nighttime gatherings were political hotbeds or poetic playgrounds. The line, as you'll soon see, is deliciously blurred. You sip. The coffee hits hard, blooming on your tongue like something alive. Your eyes adjust. The night deepens, and the coffeehouse begins to whisper. The curtain behind you rustles once, then falls still. The door you entered through has vanished into the wall, absorbed by wood and shadow like it was never there. That's how these places work. Part memory, part mirage. You lean into your cushion, still cradling the porcelain cup, and watch the room through steam-laced air. There's no menu, no waiter. The host has vanished too. In Ottoman coffee houses, especially the underground ones, service isn't something you ask for. It simply happens. Or it doesn't, depending on who you are and how you've entered. And speaking of entering, getting in is its own kind of theater. You start to notice the pattern now. No one walks through the front. They arrive, pause at the entrance like actors about to step on stage and wait for their cue. A nod from someone within a flash of colored fabric tucked into a sash, a subtle clink of a brass coin flicked toward the threshold, small gestures rehearsed and unnoticed by most. But they mean everything. You remember the man who opened the door for you. He wasn't staff. He was a regular. You were only let in because he gave the unspoken sign that you were safe, or at least curious in the right way. Here's your mainstream historical fact. While Ottoman coffeehouses were legally open to the public, their social realities were far more complex. Certain venues became havens for poets, mystics, political dissenters, and performers who walked just outside the reach of polite society. Getting in wasn't about coin, it was about code. The unwritten rules start to unfurl. You notice that everyone here has removed their shoes and tucked them under the bench carefully, toes inward, a sign of humility. You follow suit. There are no hard chairs, only cushions and floor mats arranged in soft circles that encourage leaning, murmuring, and laughter that never quite rises above the lamps. You also notice no one sits directly in the center. That space is sacred, reserved either for the night's speaker or for no one at all, depending on the mood. Tonight, it's empty. A brass incense burner sits there instead, sending up a thread of scented smoke that smells faintly of orange peel and cardamom. Now for your quirky tidbit, in some Ottoman cafes, especially those in Istanbul's older district's entrance, required knowing a phrase not spoken, but written in chalk outside the door. The phrase might change nightly. Only those who knew how to read it and respond in kind were admitted. The phrases were poetic, mysterious, and often just cryptic enough to leave out the nosy. Tonight's room hums with low conversation. A group of men in the corner sits close, whispering around a single tray of coffee cups. One of them wears the kind of robe favored by scribes. Another has the shoulders of a dock worker. The third might be a beggar or a prince in exile. Here, titles aren't checked at the door. They're shed like heavy coats. You sink deeper into the pillow. The coffee is working. Not jolting like modern espresso, but more like a slow dilation of the mind. Your thoughts stretch further. Words feel softer. Time begins to curve around the shape of the cup in your hand. The man beside you leans slightly, not looking, just offering presence. First time he asks quietly, you nod. He smiles and pours a bit more from the brass pot on the floor between you. Don't finish it all, he warns. The last sip belongs to the night. Historians still argue whether this last sip tradition was rooted in superstition or metaphor. Some say it was a nod to the jinn the unseen spirits believed to linger near doorways and thresholds. Others say it was simply a way to slow down the drink, to leave something unsaid unfinished and still alive in the cup. You thank him. He doesn't answer. He's already leaned away again, vanishing into the rhythm of the room. Your eyes drift to the corners where shadow puppets and lamps wait not yet called into action. The walls are stained dark with years of smoke and stories. And somewhere behind a curtain, a kettle starts to boil again, slow, low, steady. There's more to come. Your feet have warmed on the worn mat. Your fingers know the exact shape of the cup now, its tiny lip, its smooth glaze chipped just enough to feel lived in. This coffeehouse doesn't rush you. Time here doesn't click or tick. It brews. Across the room, someone has begun to recite poetry, not loudly, not for attention. He doesn't even stand. He leans back against a bolster, legs crossed, and lets the verses roll off his tongue like they were waiting inside the coffee all along. No applause, just quiet listening. You're starting to understand how this place works. There's a rhythm to it, subtle, flexible, never imposed. It's not just about sipping and chatting. It's a shared understanding that everyone here is contributing to something bigger than themselves, a kind of silent performance, an atmosphere brewed like the coffee itself, carefully, with heat and patience. But first, you need to master the basics: how to sit, how to stay invisible until noticed, how to look like you've always belonged here. Here's your mainstream historical fact: etiquette in Ottoman coffeehouses was unwritten but powerful. Social harmony was prized. That meant no raised voices, no loud eating, no sudden movements. Caution and courtesy weren't just polite, they were protective. The wrong look could mean being mistaken for a spy, a drunk, or worse, a government informant. You shift your posture, mirroring the others. Left hand on the knee, right hand near the cup but never gripping it. You don't gulp. You taste. Every sip is like agreeing to stay a little longer. A server passes through, not a waiter exactly, but someone entrusted with the brass sezve, the long-handled pot used for brewing. He pauses, refills a few cups with the dark, syrupy brew, then vanishes again. You don't thank him out loud. A simple nod suffices. Eye contact is optional. The man 2 cushions down takes a drag from his nargile, a tall, heavy water pipe with coiled tubing like a sleeping serpent. He exhales through his nose. The smoke rises gently and forms a soft curtain between you. Not quite privacy, not quite invitation. Now for your quirky tidbit. In some Ottoman coffeehouses, experienced regulars could tell where someone came from or what secret they carried based on how they held their sezvi, how long they stirred their cup before sipping, or even how they exhaled after a drag of the pipe. To the initiated, every breath was a language. The poetry continues in the background, and now something strange begins to happen. No one is leading the conversation, but slowly words drift across the room in a kind of echo. Someone quotes the line that was just read, but adds a new twist. Someone else murmurs a proverb that half rhymes with it. You've stumbled into a coffeehouse chain reaction, an unscheduled, semi-poetic, loosely philosophical exchange that only happens when the coffee's just right and the door's been closed long enough. No one speaks over anyone else. No one owns the moment. It floats like incense, gathering meaning as it moves. Then, just as easily, it stops. Someone coughs. The kettle boils again. A spoon clinks twice. Silence returns rich and unbothered. Historians still argue whether the intense etiquette of Ottoman coffeehouses was naturally developed or subtly enforced. Some say it was the wisdom of old patrons setting the rules. Others suspect spies and enforcers used manners as a way to measure who belonged and who needed to be watched. Your cup is nearly empty. The ground's thick at the bottom now. You don't finish it. You remember the warning. The last sip belongs to the night. And tonight, the night is still hungry. The air thickens just a little more as a fresh round of pipes is lit. Charcoal cracks softly atop the bowl of a nargile near you. The orange glow flickers like a heartbeat, and the scent of apple tobacco joins the chorus of smells already steeping in the room. Coffee clove, burnt sugar, and something that might be rosewood, or just very expensive floor polish. You lean back, letting your eyes wander. This coffeehouse doesn't have decorations in the usual sense. No tapestries, no banners, no framed art. The walls are their own gallery, darkened plaster, streaked and burnished by decades of fingertips, elbows, and drifting smoke. The only ornaments are practical: a brass ladle hanging from a nail, a carved wooden spoon tucked behind a teapot, a line of coffee cups balanced like dominoes above the fire shelf. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The interiors of Ottoman-era coffeehouses were purposefully sparse. Opulence belonged to palaces. Coffeehouses were democratic by design. Anyone could sit here if they knew how. This wasn't a place to display wealth, but to disappear into thought, or into stories. A small table near the wall suddenly hosts a new figure, a man with a beard too sculpted to be accidental, and sleeves rolled up just so. He lights a long match and begins heating a spoon slowly, deliberately. For a moment you think it's some kind of trick, but no, he's preparing his coffee his way. This is the kind of place where everyone has a method, a style, a ritual, and yours hasn't been discovered yet. You're still the newcomer, but you're watching closely now. Someone taps their spoon twice on the edge of their cup. You look across and catch a subtle exchange, an eyebrow raised, a single nod, a glance at the doorway. You realize they're talking, but not with words. Now for your quirky tidbitted regulars of elite Istanbul coffeehouses were known to speak in spoons, a system of light taps, clinks, and pauses that signaled everything from "more sugar please" to "I've heard the rumor you brought." A 3-tap pause was often interpreted as a request for silence. 4 clinks on a saucer, a joke incoming, possibly about the Sultan. Your spoon lies still beside your cup. You don't touch it. Not yet. A man walks in tall, wrapped in a wool coat carrying a thin leather folio. The room shifts slightly. Not a hush, but a pause. Like the air holds its breath to see which pillow he chooses. He's not young, not old either. His beard is unkempt, but everyone watches. He chooses the far right cushion near the incense burner and sets the folio beside him. It stays closed. He doesn't order. The coffee arrives anyway. Someone clears their throat. Another picks up the nargile hose and exhales sideways, giving space. Then slowly, like a game piece sliding into place, the man opens the folio. Inside blank paper, a single pen. He begins to write. You don't know his name. No one offers it. But from the way the room adjusts, you know he matters. Maybe a poet. Maybe a government clerk with better stories than pay. Or maybe just the best listener in the city. Historians still argue whether coffee houses were creative spaces first or subversive ones. Some accounts describe poets crafting entire epics from coffeehouse banter. Others suggest revolutions were drafted here in ink and steam. The man doesn't speak, he just writes. Your own thoughts begin to drift too. The heat, the caffeine, the repetition of motions, it all begins to untether you slightly. From the corner of your eye, you see someone unwrap a tiny box of dates and set it on the table. The kettle whistles again. Another round is coming. And maybe if you're quiet enough, the room will start talking to you next. The tray arrives without warning, carried not by a server, but by an old man in soft slippers and a robe that looks like it's seen at least 3 centuries. He hums as he walks, but the tune isn't one you recognize. It bends oddly, pausing in places where your ear expects a note, like a lullaby written by someone who never quite fell asleep. He sets down a polished copper tray in the center of the room, and just like that, it becomes a stage. You count 3 cups, 2 small saucers of candied ginger, and 1 strange object, a carved wooden stick, no longer than your finger, darkened with use, smoothed by countless palms. A chair is pulled closer to the tray. Then another. No invitation is given, but 3 men join the old man without a word. You can't tell if they know each other. They don't smile, but they sit like they've done this many times before. The old man picks up the wooden stick and twirls it between his fingers. Then he begins. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ottoman coffeehouses weren't just places for caffeine and conversation, they were informal theaters. Without stages, without tickets. A regular patron might stand up and begin a story, a song, a debate, or a poetic duel without warning, and everyone knew when to listen. This isn't acting, it's inhabiting. The old man begins to tell a story, not loudly, not theatrically. He talks like he's remembering aloud. The others lean in, listening not to the words, but the rhythm. His voice is low, gravelly. He speaks in riddles and parables, in sudden bursts of laughter that sound like broom bristles scratching a floor. You catch one line clearly. 3 men walk into a coffee house. One wants truth. One wants silence. One wants the cup to break, so he doesn't have to choose. The men around him nod. You try to parse the meaning. Someone across the room chuckles and says, truth always comes in the second cup. A pause, then laughter soft, respectful like water over stones. Now for your quirky tidbit. Ottoman storytellers known as meta were part narrator, part philosopher, part trickster. They often carried props, a stick, a handkerchief, or a single book, and used them to signal shifts in tone or character. One stick could become a sultan's sword or a widow's walking stick, depending on how it was held. In coffee houses, the meta needed no permission, just a willing audience. Tonight, the old man is your meta. His wooden stick becomes a cane, then a flute, then a gesture of mourning. His tale wanders through cities you've never seen, across bridges made of cloud, and back again to a street in Istanbul where a man once traded his shoes for a riddle. Historians still argue whether these performances were meant to entertain or to teach. Some suggest they were a form of public therapy, coded confessions woven into tales. Others believe the meta were protectors of oral memory, speaking what could never be written down. The story ends with a line so soft you almost miss it. And when the coffee cooled, only the cup remembered what was asked. Silence. A few sips. The old man sets down the stick. No applause. Just another clink of a cup. Another breath of pipe smoke. And the story is folded neatly back into the air like laundry taken in before rain. You let your eyes close for a moment. Not from sleep, but from fullness. This isn't entertainment, it's nourishment. And the night still has courses to come. The old man slips away as quietly as he arrived. The tray is gone. The chairs remain. You glance around. No one is speaking, but the silence isn't awkward, it's steeped. Like tea left to sit just long enough to become rich, not bitter. You hear the gentle scrape of a backgammon board being drawn from beneath a cushion. That's the next act. The board opens with a soft clack. The wooden checkers, rounded, worn smooth from decades of handling, are arranged quickly, rhythmically. The dice carved from bone are heavy in the hand, not casino dice. These carry stories in their weight. A player waves another forward with the tilt of his head. No words, no names. just the quiet invitation of a game played not to win, but to pass time beautifully. Here's your mainstream historical fact: backgammon, or tavla, was more than a pastime in Ottoman coffeehouses, it was an art. Almost every cafe had a set, often more than one, and regulars developed personal playing styles. Some played in silence, others with commentary. But it was always respectful, serious, even when lighthearted. You watched the dice roll. Tap, tap, rattle. 12. The men nod, rearrange their pieces, and the rhythm continues. Now and then someone nearby leans in to watch. They don't interrupt. They simply observe, nod at a bold move, or raise an eyebrow at a risky strategy. Tavla isn't about gambling, not here. It's conversation by movement, a debate without words. Someone begins reading aloud from a small book, not too loud, just enough to create a second current in the room. A line of verse about caravans and loss, another about jasmine and shadows. The reciter's voice is steady, as if the words have muscle memory. Now, for your quirky tidbit: in certain elite Ottoman coffeehouses, it was believed that the way a person played tavla could reveal their inner self. A bold opener meant a restless soul. A cautious strategy suggested spiritual doubt. Losing gracefully was a sign of wisdom, but winning too often, that made people suspicious. You notice that the backgammon game doesn't end. It dissolves. After a dozen turns, the players slowly stop moving their pieces. One offers his opponent a sweet dried fig wrapped in waxed paper. The other accepts. The board stays open, but the game is over, or maybe just paused for a few hours. Time bends here. The kettle hisses. Someone whistles just one long note held briefly. A signal. A new tray arrives, this time with shadow puppets. Yes, puppets. A sheet is unrolled in the corner, thin linen stretched across a wooden frame, lit from behind with a single flickering lamp. Two men crouch behind it, and a few figures are placed gently on sticks. One of them is short and round, the other tall and crooked. You recognize them before they even move. Karagöz and Hacivat. Here's the fringe bit: Ottoman shadow plays weren't reserved for children. Far from it. These performances, especially after dark in smoky coffeehouses, were often satirical, complex, and just a little subversive. The characters debated theology, mocked politics, and even teased the very audience watching them. The short one speaks first. His voice is nasal brash. The tall one responds in smooth, rhyming couplets. The two bicker, joke, and flail their puppet limbs with comedic grace. The audience doesn't laugh out loud, but they smile. Their shoulders shift. Their breath eases. You sit back. The puppets argue about rent, about soup, about whether coffee can predict the future. Karagöz insists it can. Hacivat scoffs, "If that were true, I'd have married someone taller." The voices behind the curtain modulate like wind catching different branches, sharp, here, soft, there. At one point, Karagöz turns and says something scandalous about the Sultan's mustache. A ripple of coughs and quiet laughter. Historians still argue whether the shadow puppets were tolerated as harmless fun or carefully watched for dissent. Some claim the best troops were given leeway as long as they avoided naming names. Others say coffeehouses were regularly raided after puppet shows went too far. Tonight, no raid comes. The curtain flutters. The puppets take their bow and exaggerated tumble. The screen is rolled back up. The lamp dims. The room exhales together. Another performance complete. You haven't said a word, but you feel spoken to. Outside, the city has gone nearly silent, save for the occasional cartwheel squeak in the far distance, or the lonely bark of a dog echoing through the winding streets. But in here, under low ceilings and flickering oil light, the night is still unfurling slowly, like steam from a fresh pour. The puppets are gone, the tray too, but in their place something new stirs. Music, not from instruments at first, but from mouths' whispers that hum into tune, low harmonies caught in the cracks of speech. Then, from a back corner, a small bowed instrument begins to play. The commence, 3 strings stretched across a narrow wooden body, lets out a tremble of sound so delicate it almost breaks before it reaches your ear. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ottoman coffeehouses were among the first public venues where secular music could be performed informally. While court music followed strict rules and liturgical music remained confined to mosques, the coffeehouse allowed for freer expression, though still within subtle boundaries. You hear the gentle beat of a kind of hand drum. Not a steady thump like in modern rhythm, but a pulse that wanders like someone walking barefoot through grass, unsure where to stop. A singer joins in, a woman, which surprises you. Because until now, it's been men only, men quiet murmuring hunched. But this voice is unmistakably feminine, clear-aged, and full of smoke not from cigarettes, but from years of standing too close to hearths and long-burning oil. You try to locate her. You can't. The voice fills the space, glides between bodies, coats the ceiling. She's singing a gazelle, a style of poetic improvisation once whispered from balcony to balcony, now only remembered by a few who stayed up late enough to listen. Now for your quirky tidbit. Some Ottoman coffee houses employed what were known as gisi kadınları, literally night women, not courtesans but singers or storytellers who only appeared after the call to night prayer. Their presence was quiet, liminal. Some were never seen in daylight. Some were never seen at all, only heard from behind curtains, their names passed in rumor. The music continues meandering through notes you don't recognize, scales that dip where you expect them to rise, harmonies that never resolve. It's like listening to a memory that belongs to someone else, someone centuries gone. A man beside you starts tapping a spoon against his cup just once every few lines. He's not keeping time. He's making a kind of agreement with the song, like a conversation only he and the voice can hear. Historians still argue whether these musical moments were planned or purely spontaneous. Some say coffee houses had secret rosters of musicians hidden among the staff. Others insist the music rose organically whenever the coffee was strong enough, and the night was long enough, and the politics were quiet enough. You sip your new cup hotter, this time slightly sweeter. It has a cinnamon note and something bitter underneath. Like the song, it doesn't finish where you expect. The singer pauses, the instruments breathe, then just as it all began, it fades. Not with an ending, but with absence. And no one claps. No one speaks. The silence afterward feels like a second performance. You let it wrap around you, a woolen hush. In the quiet, someone begins to draw on the wall. Not graffiti, but lines and ash from a burned match. A spiral, a wave, a set of overlapping circles. Another tray is placed gently near the fire. There is always another tray. And always more night to fill. A fresh aroma lifts from the new tray. Not coffee this time, something heartier, softer, tinged with honey, and something almost floral. You lean forward, catching the scent before you see the source. It's helva, a thick, warm sesame paste, sweet often shared at funerals or during late-night confessions. The dish is passed around in silence. No one takes more than a spoonful. No one asks for seconds. It's not about hunger. It's about joining a circle that isn't drawn with chalk, but with shared sugar and steam. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Helva was often served in Ottoman coffee houses during solemn or transitional moments, after intense poetry readings, before dawn prayers, or when someone wanted to signal they had something heavy to say. Its taste was both comfort and ritual. A young man near the brazier scoops a spoonful and sets it down untouched. Another nods at the gesture. You're witnessing something not mourning exactly, but a pause. A way of saying, let's hold this space without using any words. Now for your quirky tidbit, there was a custom in certain Istanbul cafes where patrons would order helva not to eat, but to mark a turning point in the evening. It could mean someone was about to propose a wild idea, recite an unfinished verse, or in some cases, confess a secret they'd never dared say aloud. In one famous instance, a coffeehouse helva moment ended with a marriage proposal and a second marriage rejection, all within 3 spoons. No such drama tonight, but the mood has shifted. Across the room, a man with unusually long sleeves stands slowly. His robe, patched in several places, sways like a curtain. You expect him to speak, but he doesn't. Instead, he walks to a corner, lifts a lantern off a shelf, and turns it just once before hanging it back. A signal. Moments later, a book is open, not read aloud, just open to a page in the middle. The man seated behind it doesn't read. He watches it, as if words might escape if he looks away. A ripple passes through the room. The helva tray returns now half empty and disappears behind the curtain near the kettle. Historians still argue whether these rituals were religious, political, or merely poetic. Some believe they were borrowed from Sufi circles where silence and symbol often said more than sermons. Others suggest they were invented here in the low light of boredom and brilliance, where men gathered to feel human without needing to explain how. The music hasn't returned, but someone nearby begins tapping again, this time on the side of the brazier with the edge of a matchbox. It's not a beat, it's a signal. The young man who left his helva untouched looks up and begins to speak. His voice is thin but steady. He speaks not in prose, not in rhyme, but in something older, a cadence that doesn't quite translate a string of images. A cracked teacup, a goat sleeping on a broken minaret, a coin placed in the mouth of a dead mirror. He stops, and then, as if released from a trance, resumes sipping his coffee. No one claps, no one critiques. A woman in the back, yes, another voice you didn't know was here, says softly, "That's enough for tonight." And it is. You sit in the echo. What you're realizing now is that Ottoman coffeehouses weren't built for volume, not in voice, not in opinion, not in crowd. They were built for density. Every cup, every pause, every silence, thick with meaning, heavy with what isn't said. The helva lingers on your tongue, sweet, slightly bitter, strangely satisfying. Someone near you stands and bows, not formally, but deeply enough to be felt. The lantern near the door dims by half, and the quiet resumes. You know it won't last for long, but you savor it anyway. The lantern near the door flickers once longer than usual and then stabilizes into a quieter glow. It's the kind of light that makes shadows look like memories instead of objects. You shift your seat slightly now, instinctively careful not to disrupt the rhythm of the room. Someone brings out a fan, not for cooling, but for directing the smoke. A large palm-woven square, slow-moving rhythmic. It pushes the scent of clove tobacco and cardamom toward you in soft waves. It's the kind of smell that seems older than the room itself. This moment is not for talking, it's for observing. And you begin to notice something new, etched patterns in the wood beneath your cushion. Tiny designs like someone doodled a life story into the floor. A boat, a horse, a palm tree, a teardrop, all no larger than a thumbnail. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many Ottoman coffeehouses had carved or painted floors not for decoration, but for symbolism. Each owner had their mark. Some patterns were protective, others were blessings. Still others were warnings to those who stayed too long or spoke too much. You trace the palm tree with your toe. It feels like you've been here for hours or days or maybe just the length of a long dream. And now someone stirs. From behind the curtain near the kettle, an elderly woman steps into view. Her robe is deep blue, frayed at the hem, her hands stained slightly yellow from spices or perhaps old ink. She carries a basket not of pastries, not of paper, but full of cloth. Scraps, really. Bits and pieces of fabric with colors so faded they seem ghostly. She begins laying them out one by one on the low table in front of her. The room leans forward, not physically, but attentively. She begins to fold. Not origami, not anything rigid, just folds, careful, deliberate, until each scrap becomes a shape, a bird, a man with a crooked cane, a star. Now, for your quirky tidbit, there was a tradition mostly in Anatolian coffeehouses where women storytellers would use folded cloth figures to act out fables or prayers. These cloth shadows were rarely named, and most performances were silent. But patrons understood them intuitively, recognizing a folded crescent moon as grief or a triangle as a warning. It was storytelling by implication. Tonight the old woman folds a horse, then a doorway, then a small rectangle folded just so that a man across the room quietly places into his robe pocket. A token A message. No one asks. She finishes with a final fold, a crescent moon with a dot below it. She leaves it in the center of the table and disappears behind the curtain again. Silence returns, not absence though. Wait. Someone coughs. Someone else taps their saucer once. Then another figure stands, a tall, thin man with hands like branches. He walks over to the crescent moon shape, studies it, and then without touching it, recites a single line. Two men crossed a bridge that had already fallen, and sits. Historians still argue whether these silent performances were part of Sufi tradition or simply folk creativity passed through generations. Some believe they were rooted in mourning rituals. Others say they were just the natural evolution of storytelling in a space where not everyone could read, but everyone felt. You feel it too. The cloth figures remain on the table. No one touches them. They're offerings, maybe, or warnings. or just what they seem gentle reminders that even silence can fold into shape. The light softens again. A tray arrives with nothing on it. An empty tray means the next act is yours, but you're not ready. You sip your coffee, bitter now grounding. You're listening harder than ever, and you realize the real story is the one you're becoming part of. The tray sits empty in the center of the room, gleaming slightly in the low light. No one moves to fill it. No one clears it away. It's a question mark with handles waiting for an answer that may or may not arrive. You sip what remains of your coffee. It's cooler now, more bitter, almost earthy. The bottom is thick sludge, really. But here's the thing, you're not supposed to drink it all. That final sip is for fortune. And sure enough, a hand reaches across the room, palm down, fingertips barely grazing the edge of the tray. A young woman with a scarf twisted like rope across her shoulders lifts it, turns it slowly in her hand, and sets it down beside a single cup. You realize what's happening. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ottoman coffeehouses weren't just places for drinking. They were spaces for reading fate. Coffee grounds, once settled, could be read by a skilled falx, a fortune teller. Some were revered, some were feared. Most worked in coded language, offering metaphors that listeners bent into meaning. The woman lifts the cup, swirls the last drop in a perfect circle, then places the saucer on top and turns the entire set upside down in one swift motion. A hush falls, gentle and curious. She taps the bottom once, then waits. The heat must cool before the story reveals itself. Now, for your quirky tidbit in certain cafes, the cup reading ritual wasn't just fortune-telling, it was poetry. Patrons would interpret the shapes inside as lines of verse. A curl of grounds might mean a journey delayed, a tiny gap could mean a truth withheld, and occasionally a perfect ring near the rim. Someone you love is already listening. The woman lifts the cup and studies its inside. Her eyes dart not with confusion, but recognition. She begins to speak. No theatrics, no drama, just lines, half poetry, half observation. You carry a small mountain in your left pocket. There is a river where your tongue should be. Someone waits for you with an empty spoon. The room listens, not for prediction, but for reflection. Historians still argue whether these fortune readings were taken seriously or were just performance art. Some believe coffee reading served a deep cultural function, a way for people to discuss fears, hopes, and secrets in symbolic terms. Others suggest it was entertainment cloaked in mysticism. The woman finishes, sets the cup down. Someone says, drink water before you sleep tonight. It's not advice, it's tradition. You wonder what your own grounds would say, but you leave your cup untouched. Not yet. The curtain near the kettle sways, though no one has passed through it. A breeze, a trick of the firelight. A figure emerges, slim gray-bearded eyes like burnt cloves. He carries a small book wrapped in silk. He opens it to the middle and begins to read, not aloud, but quietly for himself. A private ritual in a public space. You catch only one phrase as he mutters it under his breath. Let no night pass unremembered. He closes the book and slips it back into his robe. In one corner, the cloth figures from earlier have been rearranged. Now they lie flat-folded into crescent moons. The coffee is nearly gone, but the night is not. You feel a kind of stillness inside, a quiet layering of scenes, words, glances, and rituals, each one placed like an old tile hand-painted forming a mosaic only visible from a dreamlike distance. You stretch your legs. You haven't spoken in hours, and still you've never said more. Somewhere behind you, a chair creaks. It's the kind of sound that makes your shoulders soften rather than tense, familiar, well-used old wood, adjusting to another long story. The curtain near the stove flutters again, but this time, no one emerges. Just the scent of sage and something vaguely lemony. You don't turn to look. You don't need to. Your senses have shifted now. This place, this soft-spoken theater of cups and riddles, has trained you to listen differently. You hear the scrape of a spoon against clay, the hush of slippers across tile, the cough someone tries to muffle but doesn't. And now laughter. But not loud, not sharp. This is Ottoman coffeehouse laughter, a single breath, maybe two passed from one patron to another, like a secret too gentle to be kept. It comes from a low table near the wall, where two older men sit beneath a framed calligraphy scroll. One of them is missing a tooth. The other has the kind of mustache that makes you think of broom handles and soft rebellion. Between them lies a game board you haven't seen before. It's not tavla, it's something older. Here's your mainstream historical fact: before backgammon took over, Ottoman-era coffeehouses often featured mangala, a game of counters and cups with ancient Mesopotamian roots. Played with small stones or seeds, it involved strategy, foresight, and most importantly, an excellent poker face. You realize what they're doing. Each move is made without touching the board. One man points, the other tilts his head. A stone is shifted. It's as if they're playing through implication. The game is a conversation, not of moves, but of meaning. You lean closer. A thief's move, one man says after a particularly bold placement. Better a thief than a scholar with empty hands, the other replies. Now, for your quirky tidbit. In some regions of the Ottoman Empire, coffeehouse mangala players were unofficial judges of character. It was believed you could tell if someone was trustworthy by how they moved their stones. A rushed player was likely to lie. A slow player might be hiding something worse. A balanced player, rare, respected. The mustachioed man pulls a fig from his pocket, bites it, and continues playing one-handed. The seed he uses fits perfectly in the board's shallow bowl. He glances at you just once and winks. No invitation, but plenty of welcome. The laughter returns this time, joined by a gentle chime, a glass wind bell swaying from a nail overhead. It catches the light in fragments, little shards that spill like stars across the ceiling. Historians still argue whether games like mangala were imported from military camps or emerged from local market culture. Some say soldiers used it to sharpen strategic thinking. Others believe it grew from seed counters on merchant tables turned into leisure between sips. A new tray arrives, this one with dried apricots and sugared almonds. Not a meal, just offerings. They're passed without comment, like blessings you don't realize you need until they're already dissolving on your tongue. The calligraphy scroll above the players reads, "Drink with your eyes, speak with your silence." You stare a little too long, and something in you answers, "I understand now." Not fully, but enough. The game continues. The pieces shift. A small crowd gathers, not close, just loosely orbiting like planets around a soft, flickering sun. The wind bell chimes again, and you settle back in, still watching, still sipping, still waiting for the next whisper of story to find you. The wind bell fades its last chime, absorbed by the thick woven rugs that soften every surface. You feel as though you're sitting inside a memory that doesn't entirely belong to you. Comfortable, yes, but laced with that odd, almost nostalgic ache that comes when something is too perfect to be permanent. Then, from near the stove, someone starts to whistle. Not a song, not even a melody. Just a single-held note, thin and slightly off-pitch like steam escaping through a hairline crack. Heads turn, not all at once, but gently in recognition. A new figure steps forward, a man with a deep blue vest, one sleeve missing the other, patched at the elbow, with what looks like brocade from a discarded curtain. He carries a small wooden tray with only one object on it, a folded letter sealed with a dab of wax. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ottoman coffeehouses were not just spaces of leisure, they were hubs of communication. In cities like Istanbul, Aleppo, and Cairo, letters were often passed between merchants, scholars, or lovers through these cafes. Many functioned unofficially as post offices trusted by locals more than formal channels. The man holds the letter high, and the room falls into its usual listening posture, not silence exactly, but hush. No one claims the letter. Not yet. He sets it down beside the empty helva dish from earlier and retreats into the shadows. The letter sits there, glowing faintly in the firelight, like a challenge or a dare. Now your quirky tidbit: in some Ottoman cafes, it became fashionable to write anonymous letters, not to confess love or crime, but to provoke conversation. These ghost letters would be left on trays pinned to cushions, or even slipped inside coffee cups. Some were philosophical, some poetic, others entirely nonsensical, just riddles designed to inspire speculation for hours. A man in a rust-colored robe finally steps forward. He bows to the letter, "Yes, Bose," and then he reads it aloud. To the man who walks backward into sunrise, "You left your shadow in my cup. I will return it if you admit you borrowed my shoes." The audience reacts with a ripple of suppressed chuckles, nods, and one theatrical gasp. Someone near the door whispers, "Sounds like Hassan again." Another replies, "Hassan's been dead for 2 years." No one knows who wrote it. No one needs to. The man tucks the letter into his sleeve and walks back to his seat as though nothing has happened. Historians still argue whether these letter readings were a form of coded political dissent or merely theatrical games. Some documents suggest the Sultan's spies occasionally visited cafes just to eavesdrop on these readings. Others believe the authorities quietly encouraged the practice better to let the people laugh in metaphor than revolt in clarity. You glance around and notice for the first time that nearly everyone in the coffee house has something hidden in their clothing: a scrap of paper, a corner of cloth, a folded page, not concealed out of fear, carried out of ritual. A second letter appears, placed delicately in the pocket of a sleeping cat curled near the brazier. No one claims it. Not yet. And so, the night continues unfolding itself one line at a time. A whisper becomes a message, a joke becomes a story, and a sealed letter becomes the most anticipated event of the hour. You lean back, hands warm from the ceramic cup still beside you, and wonder what kind of letter you might leave behind, or whether someone has already written one for you. The fire snaps softly behind you, settling deeper into its ember glow. The cat letter, still snugly tucked into its side, stretches, yawns, and turns once before settling again, unbothered by the literary intrigue it currently embodies. No one makes a move to disturb it. In this place, even a cat with correspondence has rights. The hush in the room is now comfortable, like a shared blanket. People's shift legs are uncrossed and recrossed. A sandal is kicked off. You hear the gentle scuff of a match being struck. Someone lights a small pipe, the scent immediately betraying notes of mint and black tea. Then, without signal, a man walks to the center of the room and pulls a tiny object from his sleeve, a spinning top. He sets it on the low wooden floor and spins it with a flick of 2 fingers. The top spins a blur of brass and red lacquer, catching firelight in dizzying loops. Here's your mainstream historical fact: games weren't just pastimes in Ottoman coffeehouses. They were tests of luck, philosophy, and often veiled debate. A spinning top, for instance, was more than a toy. In many circles, it was used to settle disagreements, answer questions, or decide who would speak next. If it fell to the left, one path; if right, another. Tonight, the top spins like it has something to prove. Everyone watches. No one speaks. Finally, it wobbles, leans left, and drops. A man near the doorway smiles and stands. He's middle-aged, with a voice like dust-brushing parchment. As the top decides, he murmurs, and the room accepts this entirely. Now, for your quirky tidbit, some coffeehouses were known for what were called rotating wisdoms. Essentially, patrons would pose a question not directly, but symbolically, and allow objects like spinning tops, tumbling dice, or even falling spoons to determine the answer. It was part game, part ritual, part cosmic shrug. One cafe in Bursa even had a book of recorded spins written in rhyming verse. The man now at center holds up a cup, not for coffee, but to read a poem. He doesn't drink, only holds the cup near his mouth as he recites. "In this cup I see your absence. It stains the rim where honey once lived. Stir, stir, until forgetting tastes like clove." The room doesn't erupt in applause. Of course not. But someone nearby sighs openly, almost melodramatically. The man nods once and returns to his corner. Historians still argue whether this practice of turning everyday objects into divinatory or artistic tools was encouraged by cafe owners, or simply emerged over time as part of the culture's layered poeticism. Some see it as a secular echo of older Sufi rituals. Others claim it was a sly protest against rigidity, where randomness was the only fair authority. Back in your seat, you notice a new object placed on the game table: a feather. Just one. Long, dark, with a pale tip. It isn't discussed, but people begin glancing toward it, and the implications swirl like smoke. A boy, perhaps no older than 12, stands and asks, "Does the feather mean someone must leave?" No one answers. The spinning top is handed to him, and he pockets it proudly. The old cat stirs again. The second letter remains unread. You realize every item in this room is a sentence, some declarative, some still waiting for a verb. And the story of the night, like the top, is still spinning. The feather rests untouched on the table, silent as a comma at the end of an unfinished thought. Its shadow stretches longer than it should, curling slightly along the wood grain, like script left in a dream. You don't know its meaning, but then again, meaning here is often up for negotiation. You take a breath. The warmth of the room nestles into your collarbones, and for the first time all evening, you feel the weight of the hour begin to soften. Your shoulders drop. Your fingers stop fidgeting. Then comes a sound that breaks the lull. Not harsh, just different. A rattle. It comes from a drawstring pouch, gently shaken by an elderly man seated cross-legged near the coals. He wears 2 scarves, one of them tucked into a belt made of coins that don't seem Ottoman or even particularly monetary, more like keepsakes than currency. He opens the pouch and spills its contents slowly onto a low, flat dish. Beans. Dozens of them, each a different color, each marked with symbols in dark ink, some faded, some still sharp. A crescent, a fish, a shoe, an eye. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Fossilier folly, or bean divination, was a form of folk fortune-telling practiced across parts of the Ottoman Empire. Beans, lentils, or stones would be marked and cast, and their patterns interpreted much like tea leaves or tarot. While not mainstream Islam, these folk practices persisted under the radar, especially in late-night coffee houses, where the lines between entertainment mysticism and wisdom often blurred. The man begins to sort the beans, not speaking yet. He moves them in sets of 3, then 4, then 1 by 1. The pattern he creates looks a bit like a map and a bit like a game board, but only he seems to know the rules. Now for your quirky tidbit, one traveler wrote in a 17th century journal that he once saw a bean reader use scented beans, each soaked in different oils to enhance the feeling of the prediction. Rosemary meant loyalty. Rosewater meant betrayal. Clove was fate. When asked how the smell changed the reading, the reader reportedly answered, "Some truths are best inhaled." The man pauses, squints at the beans, and then begins. Someone among us carries a name that is not their own. A journey begun 3 Thursdays ago still waits for its real start. A letter unopened will soon be burned, not by fire, but by forgetting. The words hang in the room like laundry on a line, familiar, damp with possibility, and slow to dry. Someone near the window murmurs, "That last part's for me." Someone else whispers, "No, it's for him." The old man gathers the beans back into the pouch without further comment. He ties it closed with a knot that somehow looks final, even though it's been undone before. Historians still argue whether these readings were pure improvisation or built from memorized systems passed down like recipes. Some suggest they were once part of village healing rituals. Others insist they were just clever theater, another way the coffee house turned ordinary moments into myth. A new object appears, a tambourine placed beside the sleeping cat, as if to say, "Your move, dreamer." You glance around the room, now fully aware that this coffee house is not merely a building. It's a container of almost. Almost a mosque, almost a school, almost a stage, almost a home. And in every corner, some small ritual is being played out, not with ceremony, but with affection, as if everyone agrees that the only thing more sacred than silence is shared invention. The feather still hasn't moved. Neither have you. But something in you has already begun to shift. The tambourine rests lightly beside the cat, its small metal jingles catching faint whispers of light, but no sound yet. The cat doesn't stir. The tambourine, it seems, has no urgency. Here, even instruments understand patience. Your eyes follow the quiet movement of a woman across the room. Her dress is patterned in olive branches and curling vines, and she walks with the deliberate grace of someone who knows this room, well, perhaps too well. She carries no tray, no object, no letter, just a gaze sharp enough to part steam. She reaches the tambourine and rests her hand on it, not to play, but to hold. Her fingers drum a rhythm too quiet to hear, but visible like watching music try to remember how to be born. Then slowly she begins to hum. No lyrics, just sound, a tune that lifts and folds like soft linen in a morning breeze. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ottoman coffee houses were not solely the domain of poetry and politics. They were also safe havens for music without instruments. Humming, clapping, and finger drumming were common forms of subtle performance. Strict bans on overt entertainment often pushed patrons to find quieter, more ingenious ways to express rhythm and emotion. As the hum grows steadier, others begin to join in. Not in unison, never that neat. Instead, each voice weaves around the other like vines on a trellis, each curling in its own direction, but aiming toward the same sun. A glass is tapped. A spoon circles the rim of a bowl. Someone claps once softly as punctuation. Now, for your quirky tidbit, some Ottoman cafes were known for hosting silent songs, wordless melodies passed orally, never written down, and performed only on certain nights. These songs were said to carry the emotional weather of the week, One in Bursa, according to an old patron's diary, could make grown men cry before the second verse, except, of course, there were no verses. Tonight's hum is neither joyful nor sad. It's companionable. It sounds like the kind of thing you might hum to your reflection while shaving, or to a pot just beginning to boil, and it carries you. Historians still argue whether this form of performance was born from necessity or artfulness. Some say it was a way to skirt bans on live music during various crackdowns. Others suggest it was intentional, a crafted minimalism meant to evoke more with less. As the melody fades, the tambourine is tapped once softly and then left, where it was now holding the room's quiet like a lid over stew. The humming ends. No one claps. No one needs to, because in this moment, the silence afterward feels fuller than the music itself. You glance toward the empty tray again. The letter still sleeps beside the cat. The feather remains unmoved. And then someone drops a date pit into an empty cup. Clink, like a period at the end of a whispered sentence. You think this coffee house is a place where stories don't end. They cool. They rest. They wait for someone to notice them again later after the coffee's gone and the tray has been cleared. So you sit and wait. And the tambourine keeps dreaming beside you. The hush that follows the humming is thick enough to lean on. It swells between the cushions and rugs, gathering in the corners like dust spun from memory. For a brief, perfect moment, no one moves. Not even the fire dares to crackle. Then a shuffle. Two young men at the back of the room adjust their seats and lean over a low-painted board. Their game is unfamiliar, something part chess, part storytelling. Instead of standard pieces, their tokens include a tiny brass lion, a piece of ceramic fruit, a miniature scroll, and what looks suspiciously like a roasted coffee bean with a symbol etched into it. One of them moves the lion across 4 squares and announces he reaches the caravanserai, but the merchant is missing. The other raises an eyebrow, then slowly pushes the ceramic fruit diagonally. He finds only a peach pit. Your move. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the Ottoman world, hikaye oyunları, story games were a rare but documented form of coffeehouse entertainment. Unlike formal board games, these evolved nightly, often requiring players to invent characters' situations or riddles as part of the play. It was part competition, part cooperative tale-building, more about wit and imagination than victory. The game continues. A woman near the stove chuckles softly and mutters that peach again to herself, as if she's seen this story unfold before. Now, for your quirky tidbit. One coffeehouse in 18th century Edirne was rumored to host a single never-ending game that had lasted more than 2 decades. Patrons inherited roles from former players. One retired baker claimed he had played the same character, a mildly unlucky cobbler named Yusuf, for 9 years straight. Tonight, one of the young men knocks over the miniature scroll, gasps theatrically, and declares, "You've insulted the vizier." The other replies with mock solemnity, "Then I suppose my camel must dance for forgiveness." And he makes the lion piece do a clumsy little wobble across the board. The room chuckles not loudly but kindly. Historians still argue whether these games were taken seriously, like oral epics, or were simply improvised rituals to pass long hours. Some suggest they were ways to test memory and storytelling prowess in the same breath. Others believe they were distractions from politics when real news became too dangerous to speak aloud. The tambourine remains untouched, the feather unmoved. But the letter yes, the one beside the cat, has shifted slightly, not by hand but by a breeze perhaps, or the twitch of a tail, or maybe just because it was time. A girl no older than 10 walks over and picks it up. She doesn't open it. Instead, she holds it in her palm and asks, "Is this for me?" The old man with the bean pouch replies, "Only if it already was." She grins and runs off toward her father in the corner, clutching the letter like a treasure map. You exhale through your nose, that quiet kind of laugh that's more breath than sound. Because this right here is what makes the night real, not the games or the songs or the riddles, but the ease with which people slip into myth without noticing. You sip the dregs of your coffee, cool and thick now, and think maybe you're the merchant who disappeared from the caravanserai, or maybe you're the peach pit, and maybe your camel has already started to dance. There's a moment when everything slows, not stops exactly, but softens. The hum of the coals recedes, the scrape of slippers quiets. Even the cat ever so gently curls tighter its tail, forming a perfect little loop beside the tambourine. And then, as if signaled by something only they can hear, three men rise from different corners of the room and converge on the center rug. They bring nothing with them. No props, no instruments, not even coffee. Just themselves and one shared look, the kind that says, "We've done this before." They sit cross-legged in a triangle and close their eyes. A breath passes. Then one of them begins to speak, not loudly but clearly. No introduction, no preamble, just words falling into the room like carefully placed stones across a stream. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ottoman coffeehouses often played host to meddalar public storytellers who recited tales, histories, or fables to entertain and provoke thought. These meddas were masters of character voice and timing, often shifting roles mid-sentence. Though banned during certain eras, they persisted in quieter venues like night cafes, where storytelling became a kind of shared ritual. The man speaking now has a voice like smooth leather, rich but worn. He tells a story of a shoemaker who sewed secrets into the soles of boots. The tale winds through deserts and cities, across rivers and markets, and ends with the shoemaker forgetting all the secrets he ever carried because the final pair of boots were his own. Now for your quirky tidbit. Some meddas were known for crafting tales so tailored to their audience that regulars would swear he was telling their life in disguise. One legendary medda in Damascus even had a separate story for each table, seamlessly woven into a single performance over the course of an evening. As the first storyteller finishes, the second begins without pause. He picks up a thread from the shoemaker's story, a side character, a donkey named Hichem, and gives him the spotlight. Hichem, it turns out, had a dream about a staircase that led to a coffee cup so deep it echoed. The third man's story follows Hichem's dream and places the donkey in the coffeehouse itself, tonight's very room, where he listens to humans talk and plans his revenge for every undertipped journey. The audience doesn't laugh, not in the ha-ha way, but they smile, they smirk, they lean forward. Because suddenly everything here feels connected. The games, the letters, the feather, the tambourine, even the cat seems to be listening with its eyes closed. Historians still argue whether these stories were scripted, improvised, or passed down through centuries of oral tradition. Some claim meddas had notebooks hidden under their robes. Others believe they memorized hundreds of hours of tales, each adaptable, depending on the mood of the room or the spice in the air. The three men bow their heads in unison when the final tale ends. They rise, return to their corners, and sip quietly, as if nothing happened. But everything has happened. You feel it in the room, a kind of warmth that isn't just from the fire. It's the warmth of being known, of being part of something, even as an outsider, that stretches back hundreds of years and still lives in soft voices, candlelight, and cups that remember your hand. You glance at the feather, still unmoved, but suddenly it doesn't feel still. It feels waiting. And maybe, just maybe so are you. The stories linger in the air, clinging like the last curls of steam above a forgotten teacup. You find yourself sitting straighter now, but not because anyone asked you to. It's just something this room does. It invites your attention without demanding it. A moment later, a low whir of strings rises from the far corner, subtle at first, like a moth brushing the rim of a lantern. You turn to see an instrument you almost missed, a kemenche, small and pear-shaped, cradled lovingly in the arms of a man whose age could only be measured in stories. He doesn't play it like he's performing. He plays it like he's remembering. The notes are slow, sweet, and slurred, each one holding on to the next like old friends walking home together. No melody you know, but it feels like something your heart must have hummed once back when it had fewer worries and more soup. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The kemense, especially the classical variety played in Ottoman court music, was also a staple in certain coffeehouses, particularly those known for attracting poets and intellectuals. Unlike louder stringed instruments, its soft nasal tone suited the intimacy of small indoor gatherings. But tonight this isn't court music. This is lullaby for grown-ups music. You glance at the feather again. Still waiting. Now for your quirky tidbit, one account from a 19th century traveler claimed he met a man in a Galata coffeehouse who played the same kemense song every Thursday night for 40 years, except no one else could hear it unless they were drinking cardamom coffee. The traveler tried it, swore it worked, and then forgot the tune entirely when he sobered up. The man with the commence plays a slow glissando, just his fingers sliding down one string, and somehow it feels like he just opened a curtain on your soul. He stops. No bow, no thanks. Just a smile into his coffee and the casual confidence of a man who knows the room is his, even if no one claps. Historians still argue whether musicians in Ottoman coffee houses were sanctioned spontaneous or tolerated as long as they didn't disrupt the purpose of the gathering. Some believe the boundaries were drawn by sound level, others by content. One theory says that it wasn't what you played, but how much emotion you dared to show while playing. Tonight's player showed just enough. A woman across the room dabs at her eyes with the corner of her scarf. No one teases her. That's the rule. If the commence plays your truth, you're allowed to feel it. The tambourine shifts. Just once, a tiny tilt, no sound. The cat blinks but doesn't move. You take another sip of your now lukewarm coffee. It's thick at the bottom, syrupy with grounds, and strangely comforting. It tastes like time, bitter slow, and more generous than you expected. And then the humming starts again. Not from the woman this time, but from the whole room, quietly, gently, like a breeze remembering its way home. You hum too, and somehow the feather feels lighter. Maybe the night is preparing you for something. The humming trails off the way. Candlelight flickers before it goes still, present, but loosening its grip on the walls. The air thickens again, not unpleasantly, but like dough rising under a warm cloth. Everything feels suspended, like the night is holding its breath. Then through the haze of scent and sound you hear them. Footsteps. Not heavy, not hurried, but numerous. Deliberate. Sandals scuffing the stones outside. Wooden buckets clinking gently. A squeak of a yoke against leather. Water sloshing in rhythm with human pace. The door opens. 5 figures enter, each carrying a vessel. Some copper, some clay. One made entirely of hammered tin that catches the firelight like rippling moonlight. The watermen have arrived. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ottoman cities like Istanbul relied heavily on Sabilti water carriers and fountain tenders who distributed clean drinking water, especially at night when the streets cooled and the thirst of the day lingered. These men often worked into the small hours, delivering to homes, mosques, and yes, coffee houses, where patrons trusted them more than the dusty cisterns or public spouts. They move as one like dancers in slow motion. No talking, just nods exchanged with the host. One fills a ceramic basin beside the stove. Another pours water into the hand-washing bowl at the back. A third carefully replaces the brass kettle by the fire, with one freshly filled and faintly steaming. But the fourth, he carries no water. Instead, he approaches the tray where the letter once rested and places a small folded cloth on it. You lean to look. It's embroidered with a single symbol, an open eye surrounded by waves. The room shifts. Not alarmed, just tuned, like someone touched a string you didn't know was part of your spine. Now, for your quirky tidbit, watermen in some Ottoman neighborhoods were said to moonlight as messengers, spiritual advisors, or even spies. Their roots took them through every layer of society, and many claimed they could tell the mood of a district just by how the doors opened slow, quick slammed, or silently ajar. The cloth remains untouched. The 5th waterman enters last, trailing behind, younger than the others. He carries nothing, just a small folded note tucked into the band of his vest. He does not deliver it. He simply sits in the farthest corner, pulls his knees up, and listens. Historians still argue whether the presence of watermen in late-night cafes was purely logistical or if their silent comings and goings served a symbolic role. One theory suggests they represented the flow of stories and memory never stopping, always circulating, refreshing the room without drawing attention. Tonight they feel like ghosts of rivers slipping between tables with ancient ease. You drink from a fresh cup poured from the new kettle. The water is cool and sweet. It tastes like something forgotten, something mountain-born. And suddenly you wonder, was the letter always meant for the watermen? Or did they bring the next part of the night with them? Because just then the youngest one lifts his head and smiles at you. Not a big smile, just enough to make you wonder what he knows that you don't. The feather stirs. Only slightly, but enough. Something is beginning, or maybe continuing, and all you can do is wait and listen cup in hand as the watermen slip back out the door, their empty buckets lighter than the quiet they leave behind. The door closes behind the last waterman with a hush so soft it might as well be memory. You hear the faintest jingle of brass rings, the clatter of an empty pail shifting against another, and then nothing. Istanbul's night wraps itself tight again, save for the lull of breath and flicker of fire. The basin by the hearth now brims with water that reflects the room like a miniature dream, wavy, imperfect, yet oddly whole. You see yourself in it, or at least a version of yourself softened by shadow and steam. Someone chuckles behind you. You see it too. You turn slightly, and an old man with 2 beaded bracelets and 1 clouded eye nods toward the water. He continues, that basin doesn't just hold water, it holds what hasn't happened yet. You offer a half smile, uncertain whether it's a joke, a trick, or an invitation. Here's your mainstream historical fact: public water bowls and basins were common fixtures in Ottoman coffee houses. Meant for hand-washing, purification, or simple refreshment, they often took on symbolic meaning. In some cafes, a still basin at midnight was seen as a mirror to one's conscience, quiet, shimmering, waiting to show something not quite visible in daylight. Tonight, though, the basin does more than shimmer. It ripples. No breeze, no hand, but something moves it gently like an exhale through silk. And then almost shyly, a book appears. No one carries it. No one announces it. It simply sits now beside the basin, its cover weathered, its clasp loose. You could swear it wasn't there a moment ago. The host picks it up and opens it to a random page. A slip of paper falls out. He reads it aloud, "Beware the quietest guest." A pause. The entire room looks toward the feather, still unmoved. Now, for your quirky tidbit, some Ottoman coffee houses, particularly those near old caravan routes, kept communal dream journals, books where patrons wrote dreams real or imagined under pseudonyms. These were then interpreted by others anonymously and read aloud on special nights known as Gecenin Yansıması, the night's reflection. Some patrons swore by the advice they received. Others swore never to write again. The host closes the book without revealing more. He sets it beside the tambourine. The tambourine, the book, the feather. The trinity of silence. Historians still argue whether these objects were chosen intentionally or simply accumulated over time, each imbued with myth because someone decided it mattered. One scholar suggested that objects in Ottoman coffee houses behaved like actors in a play, with no script waiting for the audience to decide what kind of story they were in. Tonight, the story feels circular. The girl with the letter returns. It's opened now. But all she says is it's blank. The host nods. Then it's yours to finish. The cat flicks its tail. And finally, the feather stirs. Not by touch, but by choice. It lifts ever so slightly, carried on no wind, and drifts lazy slow like a yawn turned into movement. It lands in the basin, floats. No one says a word. You feel it, though. Something has turned. You look back into the basin, and this time you don't see yourself. You see the coffee house. From above. All of it. Lit from within, glowing in a city of dark roofs and sleep-shuttered windows. The feather drifts. The cup cools. The next moment hasn't happened yet, but you're ready. The feather floats in the basin like a question that doesn't need an answer. It spins slowly, following invisible eddies, driven not by fingers or wind, but by the quiet inertia of the night. Around it, the reflection of the room wobbles and reforms, never settling, always on the cusp of clarity. And then the door creaks open. No footsteps, no voices, just the door inching itself ajar. No one reacts. Not with alarm, not even with surprise. It's almost as if everyone here was expecting it, or had forgotten to expect it until just now. In steps a man, or perhaps the man. You can't quite tell. He wears a hood, not for hiding, but for softness, the way someone might shield a candle from the breeze. His robes are plain, but worn well, the hem dark with city dust and ash from many nights, just like this one. He moves like he's been here before, because of course he has. Here's your mainstream historical fact. There are several accounts from the 16th and 17th centuries that describe Ottoman sultans, grand viziers, and other officials disguising themselves to visit coffee houses at night. These excursions were often a way to take the pulse of the people, hear gossip, observe opinion, or more romantically, escape the weight of their own titles. The man walks past the commence, past the tambourine, past the book. He pauses at the feather, then keeps walking. He takes the only empty chair, one that now that you think of it, has always been empty all night. No cushion, no cup, no crumbs, just waiting. Now for your quirky tidbit. some late-night cafes left a single chair untouched for the unseen guest. While officially labeled as poetic superstition or a nod to religious humility, many patrons treated the seat with deference, whispering jokes or secrets to it as if confiding in a wise ghost. In one cafe in Üsküdar, the empty chair had its own tab, and some nights, someone always paid it. The man says nothing, but everyone in the room seems to exhale, as though some tension, some tightly laced boot of silence has been untied. The girl with the blank letter approaches him, holding it out like a birthday card to an uncle who arrives too late and too often. He accepts it with a nod and tucks it into his robe without looking. You expect some grand moment, a declaration, a speech, a secret revealed. Instead, he lifts his hand not to signal not to wave, but simply to rest his fingers in the air, palm open. And in that stillness, the tambourine shivers. Just once, like something was decided. Historians still argue whether these anonymous visitors were real rulers or local legends embroidered by time. Some believe these figures were invented by the cafe owners to make patrons behave. Others argue that the illusion of power passing among the people disguised and listening was more valuable than the actual visit itself. Tonight, though, the illusion feels real enough to drink. You sip again, though you hadn't meant to. The cup is warm once more. Was it refilled? You didn't see it happen. But here you are, sipping the same blend that has watched stories unfold for centuries. The tambourine is still again. The feather settles. The letter is gone. And the man. He is seated silent like a punctuation mark you won't understand until the end of the sentence. You don't need to know more. You just need to stay a little longer. Because sometimes in Ottoman coffeehouses, the answers arrive one cup after you leave. The man in the hooded robe doesn't speak, and yet somehow the room grows quieter in his presence, like even silence wants to impress him. His hand remains lifted, fingers spread slightly, not commanding, but offering. An invitation maybe, or a pause in a story that no one dares interrupt. You glance around. The letter is gone. The feather is still. The book remains closed, but it feels somehow heavier, as if it just learned something it won't tell you. And the chair, the once empty one, no longer feels like a placeholder. It feels filled, anchored. Your cup is warm again. No one brought it to you. But it's full. Again. The host walks past, brushes his fingers lightly across your shoulder, and says, without looking, some nights the cup refills if your story isn't finished. You try not to make a sound as you sip. Here's your mainstream historical fact records from as early as the reign of Sultan Murad IV. Yes, the same one who banned coffee, tell of his nighttime wanderings dressed in civilian clothes. According to chroniclers, he did this not only to catch lawbreakers, but to engage in honest conversation beyond the palace walls. Whether those stories are entirely true, of course, is a matter still debated. Which brings us to our guest. The man in the chair finally moves. He doesn't speak, but he taps his index finger once against the rim of the table, just once, and the host brings over a folded cloth. Not silk, not embroidered, plain, sturdy cotton. Inside it, a handful of roasted beans still warm. He places one on the table in front of him, then pushes it toward the tambourine. It doesn't roll. It doesn't need to. The gesture is enough. Now, for your quirky tidbit, in some Ottoman cafes, it was said that certain patrons could tip the mood of the entire evening with a single gesture. A drop spoon might signal a new poem. A bean placed beside the tambourine meant the next story must involve the unseen. One cafe near Galata even had a bell that rang when no one touched it. Patrons said it was the room deciding it wanted something. And tonight, the room wants something. The girl who once carried the blank letter now stands beside the tambourine. She looks to the man. He nods once. She lifts the tambourine. Everyone inhales, and then she doesn't shake it. She speaks. Just one sentence. There is a ship in the sky tonight. Then she places the tambourine gently on the floor and walks away. No one laughs. No one claps. They just nod. Because, of course, there is. Historians still argue whether the stories that took place in coffeehouses shaped Ottoman political life or were just diversions from it. But more and more scholars admit that these spaces, these nights, were where the empire dreamed out loud. And tonight, the dream feels vivid. Your cup is empty again, but you feel full, like something has been poured into you rather than out of you. The hooded man stands. He places a single coin on the table. Not large, not gold. just old. The kind of coin no one uses anymore, but everyone keeps for reasons they can't explain. And then he leaves. No words, no ceremony, just the quiet creak of the door. The coin remains gleaming slightly in the firelight. The bean is still beside the tambourine, and somehow you know that was the story. Not told, not heard, but felt. And sometimes that's more than enough. The door clicks shut behind the hooded man, and the room doesn't rush to resume anything. There's no applause, no chatter, just a moment held like breath caught in the chest of the city itself. You sit with your cup empty now, but warm in your hand, and listen, not for sound, but for something more subtle, the echo of story, the aftertaste of meaning. Someone stirs the fire, a soft metallic ring as the poker shifts coals. A few sparks leap up, spin, and vanish. The bean remains beside the tambourine. The coin gleams beside the basin, and you remain where you are because you sense the night isn't done with you yet. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ottoman coffeehouses weren't just dens of entertainment. They were incubators for civic thought. Poets, mystics, merchants, soldiers, and scholars alike all gathered to sip-speak and observe. Conversations here influenced policies, art, and occasionally even the direction of revolts. Though some rulers tried to suppress them, they always returned more quietly, more carefully, but always with fire. Tonight, though, the politics are softer. A man stands near the basin and begins to recite, not perform, but recite an old prayer, not one from any specific book, but something oral passed down from grandmother to uncle to neighbor. You can't catch all the words, but the rhythm is gentle, like tide over stone. Then comes a smell. Something sweet, not perfume, not incense. Dates. Someone unwraps a cloth, and nestled inside are glistening dates stuffed with crushed pistachio and something darker, molasses perhaps. They're passed around hand to hand. No plate, no napkin. Just soft fingers and old trust. A girl presses one into your palm without a word. You bite. It's sticky rich, a little bitter, and absolutely perfect. Now, for your quirky tidbit, it was common for certain coffee houses to bring out one specific food item only after a particular story had been told. One cafe in Bursa, for instance, kept a small tin of rose syrup dates under the counter, offered only when someone recited the tale of the Black Falcon of Uluda. The treat was not about hunger, but continuity, a bite taken by every listener, linking them across time. The date in your mouth feels like tradition disguised as dessert. The tambourine trembles, not shaken, just nudged. It's the cat. It finally rises, stretches long, and places one deliberate paw atop the tambourine. The bean rolls half an inch. And that's enough. Historians still argue whether the mysticism attributed to these cafes was real romanticized or retrofitted by nostalgia. But no one debates that they were places of ritual. Whether sacred or secular, performed or accidental, these spaces wove magic out of motion, tiny repeated acts that turned waiting into wondering and wondering into story. The girl who spoke of the skyship now curls beside the fire, cradling the empty book. The man with the cloudy eye hums a tune that has no melody, just tone. And you feel the room folding inward, not closing, just nestling deeper into itself, as if preparing for a dream. Your cup is still warm. Your fingers are sticky with date. And the bean is waiting just like you. Because even though the guest is gone, the story is still happening. And some nights, the quietest chapter is the one that stays with you longest. You don't know when it happens exactly, when the hush of the coffeehouse stops being something around you and becomes something inside you. It's not silence anymore. It's presence, deep, still, and layered, like sitting in a story that remembers you. The fire has burned low. The shadows stretch longer, curl softer. The basin no longer reflects anything but darkness. And the coin, it has tilted slightly, catching the last glow from the coals, like a tiny sun on its last breath. You glance toward the tambourine. The bean is gone. Not knocked, not kicked, just missing. And no one asks where it went, because they all seem to know. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Toward the later centuries of the Ottoman Empire, some coffeehouses adopted the practice of closing not with lights out or sweeping, but with a moment of vanish. This wasn't literal disappearance, of course, but a ritualized ending, the removal of one object often unnoticed by most patrons that signaled the night had passed into memory. Tonight the bean was your vanish, and yet the story continues. The host stands again, How is he still upright after all this time? And opens a small wooden drawer behind the counter. From it, he takes a pouch, unmarked, worn, sealed with a loop of twine. He walks it to the girl with the book and sets it in her lap. She looks down, then up, and asks only, "Is it mine now?" He nods. She doesn't open it. Not yet. Now for your quirky tidbit. In one surviving account from a 17th century traveler, he notes that certain cafes had pouches which held not coins but confessions. These small leather sacks were passed down through trusted regulars, each person adding a folded slip of paper containing a dream, a secret, or an unanswered question. No names, no rules, and no one ever read them aloud. The pouch was said to be for the coffee house itself, to help it remember what mattered. The girl places the pouch beside her and closes her eyes, as if handing over the final thought of the night to sleep itself. And just then, the tambourine gives one last sound, not a shake, not a rattle, but a tiny creak, as if acknowledging that something unseen just rose from it. Historians still argue whether this blend of object gesture and timing truly qualified as performance art or something older and unnamed. Some compare it to proto-theater, others call it a kind of public dream-making, but most agree it wasn't just coffee, it was communion. The host begins to snuff the lanterns, one by one, each extinguished like a sigh. No rush, just a gentle unwinding of flame. You think of your cup now finally cold, of your fingers still sweet from the date, of the book unopened again, but now heavier with meaning. You rise without deciding to, stretch without fanfare. The others follow suit one by one. No shoes scraped, no chairs dragged. Everyone knows how to leave here, quietly, like a dream leaving its host. You pass the coin, still gleaming. You pass the tambourine, still still. You pass the feather, still wet from the basin. But it glows now faintly like a story no longer trying to hide. And as you step into the cool air outside, you don't feel like a guest anymore. You feel like a page someone just wrote on and folded gently into the pouch. The street outside isn't empty, but it feels untouched. The stones underfoot are damp from the dew of stories just released. Somewhere in the distance, a boat creaks at dock, tethered to a post that's older than most buildings in the district. A dog sighs in its sleep behind a shuttered fruit stall. Even the moon seems to squint a little, as though trying to peek inside the coffee house you just left. You walk. Not fast, not slow, just at the speed of someone still digesting a dream. The night wraps itself around you, not cold exactly, just aware, watching you the way the coffee house did, letting you go, but not really letting you leave. There's a whisper of cloth behind you. You turn. No one, but you feel it. You're not alone. Here's your mainstream historical fact. After-hours movement through Istanbul's neighborhoods was often orchestrated by social rhythms rather than legal curfews. Night watchmen known as bekçi patrolled the streets with staffs and lanterns announcing the time, and sometimes singing lullabies. But there were others, unofficial drifters, or gezgin rular, wandering souls who carried new songs or just presence, keeping the city awake at its softest seams. Tonight, you are one of them. You walk past another closed cafe. Its shutters are etched with faded calligraphy. He who drinks in silence hears the world sing. A soft rustle. And then beside you, just for a moment, a figure. The girl with the book. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. You glance down. She carries the pouch now looped gently around her wrist. In her other hand is the tambourine. No rattle, no sound, just the curve of possibility. She nods to you, then turns into a side street and disappears. Now, for your quirky tidbit, it was said that some tambourines carried echoes, not sounds, but emotions. A musician from Edirne once swore he could feel who had held a tambourine last simply by touching its frame. A girl in Izmir claimed hers only rattled when she was sad. Others believed that tambourines used during storytelling absorbed endings and would never sound quite the same again. Yours is silent, but full. You round one last corner, and there it is. Your door. Not grand, not glowing, just waiting. A brass handle. A familiar creak, the scent of your own pillow, waiting like an old friend inside. Historians still argue whether these night journeys from coffee house to home or from story to silence were ritualized or simply habit. One theory holds that walking after story time helped settle the narrative into the body like shaking a snow globe and waiting for the flakes to fall. You pause. You think of the feather, the coin, The bean, the pouch, the book, the hooded man, the ship in the sky, the tambourine's final breath. You reach for the handle, and as your fingers touch the brass, you feel it the warmth of a night still happening. Not finished, just paused. Like a bookmark between chapters, you slip inside and close the door behind you with a quiet click, muffled by the thick hum of sleep all around. The room is dark save for the faintest sliver of light brushing across the floor from the window. The city beyond is settling now, its heartbeat slow and steady like yours. You ease yourself onto the bed, every movement gentle like folding into water. The blankets are soft, familiar. Your body, still wrapped in story, begins to melt into the mattress. The taste of coffee still lingers faintly on your tongue, bitter smooth and oddly sweet now in memory. The scent of smoke and dates clings to the edges of your thoughts, fading but not forgotten. You feel the tambourine's silence echoing in your chest, a beat that doesn't need sound to be heard. You breathe in, hold, exhale slowly, again. Each breath loosens something small, a shoulder, a thought, the lingering question of whether the bean ever existed at all. The night outside is peaceful now, the kind of peace that doesn't demand attention, just allows it. Your story has wound its way through narrow streets and fire-lit rooms, through cups passed hand to hand, through the quiet weight of old books and unopened letters. It has landed here, in this bed, in this moment. And you don't need answers. You just need to rest. Let the last flickers of memory dissolve into the softness beneath you. Let the tambourine be still. Let the feather drift wherever it needs to go next. The coffee house will still be there, waiting just beyond the edge of sleep.